to international donor agencies, for example. These international agencies are saying to NGOs that you have to be organized in a very specific way. You have to be responsible for the funding that is being provided to you. And so the government is seeking, Mr. Speaker, by this legislation, to strengthen the hands of NGOs and to say to NGOs that you too have to be responsible for what is being provided to you. Over the last few years, many of the projects that have been implemented through agencies, particularly the Poverty Reduction Fund, these projects have been implemented directly through the NGOs. I can think of many examples, Mr. Speaker, today, where organizations like the Blind Welfare Association, the Mental Health Association, the Cornerstone Humanitarian Society have benefited directly from funding that was not available before, Mr. Speaker. And so it is as a result of the maturing nature of society, it is as a result of government saying that we cannot do it alone, civil society has a role to play, but government is making an important point to civil society, that we understand the need to support civil society in its efforts. And so today, an NGO can knock on the door of a poverty reduction fund. It can knock on the door of a BNTF without having to go to a parliamentarian. And that is an important distinction that this government has sought to ensure, that it has removed the politicization, Mr. Speaker, of the work of NGOs and given NGOs a platform on which they can stand without needing the direct support of a parliamentarian, for example. So today, a Labrie Development Foundation can make direct representation to a poverty reduction fund, to a basic needs trust fund. Mr. Speaker, that is what we do when we seek to find ways to empower our community and to empower our society. We have been able to work with NGOs not only to provide funding for them, but to enable them with the capacity that they need. And so if you dialogue with almost any of these established NGOs today, they will say to you that they have benefited not only from funding, but benefited from technical support to strengthen themselves. And so today, Mr. Speaker, this bill is actually very timely, because over the last few years, we have been engaged in the business of providing technical support to them. And to enforce this legislation, Mr. Speaker, should be no problem. It should be absolutely no problem, because civil society, particularly our NGOs, are now well placed to embrace the type of reality that this legislation is bringing about. Mr. Speaker, one important aspect of this legislation that I am particularly pleased about is that it calls associations and organizations to be not only responsible for, but accountable for what is being provided to them. Communities, having placed their trust in NGOs, now want to ensure that they could feel a sense of safety and security as it relates to the implementation of their business. This legislation makes very specific recommendations and puts in place very specific rules of operation to ensure that communities can feel satisfied that NGOs are operating above board and at the level in which, Mr. Speaker, they can feel a level of comfort to say, yes, I am satisfied that the work of these various organizations is seeking to fulfill our interests. Mr. Speaker, on a weekly basis, my ministry, Mr. Speaker, meets with a number of organizations and persons seeking to form organizations. Only last week, Mr. Speaker, we met with a number of groups within communities who are now seeking to strengthen their establishment. Some of them have operated in an informal way, and they are seeking to strengthen the work that they are doing. In fact, Mr. Speaker, there is a very interesting advent over the last few months in particular, which we have noticed, that a number of young organizations, young in terms of their age, the age of the organization, but very youthful in terms of what they comprise, that these young people are coming forward and using their talent to seek to establish informal NGOs. And so even the traditional NGOs that my colleague, the parliamentary representative of Barbano, spoke of, is now evolving into an advent of a more dynamic type of organization, which is auguring well for the development that we want to see taking place in society. So, Mr. Speaker, this act which is before us, this bill, is actually well on its way to fulfilling the mandate or the request that is being made by these organizations over and over again in a very timely manner. Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat, I just want to use the opportunity to put on record my profound appreciation to all of the NGOs who have worked with the social agencies over the last few years, Mr. Speaker. They have assisted in strengthening these agencies. And so while the Poverty Reduction Fund and the BNT